Chapter 6. Go West. There's something to be said for the psychological benefit of driving for miles on end down an open stretch of highway, which was proving to be therapeutic for Jack. As he passed by endless acres of corn, soybean fields, and green farmlands, he slowly began to appreciate the beauty of a country that he had rarely seen in years. In the past, when he and Julie had taken their family vacations, they always traveled by air. This popular mode of travel, although swift and efficient in use of time, unfortunately caused them to miss out on seeing everything that was in between on the land below. Now, he couldn't get enough of this newfound freedom. It was something he'd never felt before. Even so, his thoughts never dwelt on his wife Julie and their 3 children of the present, but only on his family of the past. As if, for now, his mind had shut them, or at least the thought of them, out of it completely. The cool April wind whisking in and around his face and the smell of the countryside beckoned to him, pleaded with him to go on. But where to? He wondered. For now, his destination didn't really matter. The pull of the western sun was like a magnet to Jack, drawing him and tempting him onward. The sound of the motorcycle engine throbbing beneath him proved just as soothing as the sound of the wind whipping through his helmet. He now had something he hadn't before. He had time. Jack had been on the road for nearly an hour and a half before he even began to think of pulling off somewhere for a break. It was probably around this very same time that Jack suddenly realized that he had no clothes packed to wear. Luckily, he had a large jacket stashed in the trunk of his car, which he'd thrown on before he left Crystal Lake. All Jack was wearing were the clothes that he'd left for work in that morning. Somehow, a Van Huysen dress shirt, tie, and gray Hugo tweeds weren't exactly the kind of clothes you want to wear on a motorcycle road trip. It was around this time that Jack decided to make his first stop near the town of Dixon, Illinois. He decided that it was time to grab something to eat, get some gas for his bike, and hit the nearby Walmart store to gather some needed items for his trip, wherever that might be that he would eventually wind up. As Jack entered the store, he grabbed a cart and proceeded to fill it up with everything he could think of as he passed swiftly from aisle to aisle. Jack had no pre-planned shopping list with him, as was his normal routine. He just grabbed as he went. A few shirts, pants, some razor blades, shoes, socks, underwear, a few bags of chips, and so on. Very soon, his cart was full. When he was finished, he walked to the front of the store and lined up to wait with the other customers to pay for everything he had. With cash, of course. The clerks at the store probably never even noticed, with all the other customers coming and going. The rather normal-looking man in business dress clothes walking into the men's restroom, then walking out minutes later wearing a pair of new blue jeans, a polo shirt, and tennis shoes. He stuffed all his old dress clothes into an empty grocery bag, along with his cell phone, and tossed everything into the large dumpster behind the nearby McDonald's on his way out of the parking lot, resisting any urge he might have had to check his messages. With that done, Jack pulled into a nearby Road Ranger store to fill up his bike with gas and then grab a bite to eat before hitting the road again. As he sat down for a few minutes to eat his sandwich, he noticed a family of 4 ordering food. He watched them curiously as the 4 of them sat down in the booth across the aisle from him. The young couple had 2 young children that reminded Jack of Ellen and Josh, except that they were about 3 or 4 years younger. As Jack watched, the little girl kept smacking her brother on the top of his head. "Get your hands out of my chips," she yelled. The boy waited a moment until his sister wasn't watching and stole another chip, watching his mom and dad as if to gauge their reaction. "Mom, will you tell Brian to leave my chips alone?" she demanded. "Brian, eat your sandwich. You didn't even want chips, remember?" his mother asked. The little boy gave his mother an "I didn't do anything wrong" look, as he then shot a glance over at Jack for a moment. Jack tried to look oblivious to the unfolding drama, but was finding it hard not to laugh, as the scene reminded him of many times in the past with his own 2 children. The young mother gave her husband a look of exasperation. "I'll be back in a minute," she said, leaving the table for the restroom in the back of the small restaurant as the little girl followed behind her. Jack noticed, as the young boy turned back around to his father and whispered something into his ear, as Jack continued to finish his sandwich. "Hey, mister, that's a real cool bike you got," remarked the young boy, smiling wide and looking over at Jack. "What kind is it?" "Thanks, kid," said Jack. "It's a Honda Cruiser," explained Jack. The boy smiled again. "Cool, I'm gonna get me one, just like it someday." The young dad gave Jack an apologetic look. "Sorry, sir. Please excuse my son. He's just crazy about motorcycles." "Not a problem," mumbled Jack, finishing off his last bite. "You ride bikes at all?" "No, my wife doesn't allow the kids anywhere around them, even though her brother has a whole garage full of dirt bikes. He keeps inviting us to along on one of his trips, but my wife is worried about accidents," replied the young dad. "You're lucky your wife lets you ride." Jack was speechless for a moment. "Yeah, I'm lucky. Hey, kid, hang in there. Maybe one of these days your mom will give in and let you have a chance to ride. You'll love it." Jack wrapped up what was left of his napkin and sandwich and threw them in the trash. "Where are you headed?" asked the young dad. "Don't know yet. Just out for a drive. Down the road," explained Jack. "Well, have a good ride." "Sorry about my curious son," said the dad. "That's all right?" Jack smiled and turned and left the restaurant. Jack looked at his watch. 4 o'clock, he mumbled. Jack guessed he had about 2 more hours of solid road time left, before sunset and cooler temperatures would force an end to his travels for the day. At some point later down the road, he would need to stop and find a place to spend the night. Jack felt strangely at ease as he zipped up his new jacket and climbed back on his motorcycle. Moments later, he was cruising down the freeway, and the sounds and feel of the highway before him were once again soothing away all thoughts of past events of the day. As Jack watched, the sun was just beginning to approach the horizon, and out of the corner of his eye, he saw an ad for a hotel just 5 minutes away, on the right side of the highway, near a little town called Altoona, Iowa. He pulled into the front of the small hotel, got a room for the night. Nothing fancy, just a nice bed, shower, and peace and quiet. Looking out the window, Jack watched a moment as the light of day faded into night. Jack turned around and crawled into his bed and closed his eyes, deciding his destination would be Las Vegas. It was at least a 2-day ride ahead, and he would need a good night's sleep for the long journey. It was near the final leg of his 3rd day on the road when Jack caught his first glimpse in the distance of his destination. Ahead, he could see Las Vegas shimmering just above the waves of heat above the road as he crossed over the last ridge on the I-15 overlooking the city. It had been a long day, and the first order of business would be to find a room at one of the casinos on the Strip. He wondered if his luck would continue with him as contemplated which casino to explore first. This would be Jack's first time ever to Sin City, as many of his friends often referred to it. The closest he had ever come to ever being in a Las Vegas-style casino was several years ago, when he and Peter had decided one afternoon during one of Peter's summer breaks to visit the Grand Victoria Casino in Elgin. He remembered how they talked about one day making a trip with their wives to either Las Vegas or Atlantic City to jointly celebrate their wedding anniversaries, but the two of them never got around to doing it. It had been a hard ride for Jack to make Vegas before nightfall. Now he truly understood why Jimmy the salesman back at Rogers Road Rods suggested purchasing the larger cruiser types of bikes, and he was glad for it. After nearly 3 days on the road, his butt was getting sore, and he was ready to get off and walk around for a while. Jack continued down the highway until he saw the large white hotel casino off to the side of the freeway with Caesar's Palace written in large letters across the top. That's the place, he decided. He'd always wanted to see what the palace was all about. After finally finding a place to park his bike, Jack found himself standing in line at the front registration desk, waiting to get a room. As he waited in line, he took notice of the various people who were waiting in line with him. There was the young couple in the next line over, who couldn't keep their hands or lips off each other. In the line ahead of him was a middle-aged couple who looked to Jack to be well-seasoned gamblers, with their discount passes and coupons in hand and plastic casino cards strapped around their necks. Then behind him, there were two couples about his age, with 6 teenage kids, who were all carrying on conversations with each other, all the while busily checking their smartphones or playing games. Finally, it was his turn as the young girl behind the desk looked up at Jack for a moment, with a slight look of surprise. Jack was beginning to wonder if, after 3 days of being on the road, not shaving, and few showers, he must have looked a scary sight indeed. Prosody plus 7%. Good afternoon, and welcome to Caesar's Palace. How may I help you? She asked. I'd like a room for 2 nights with a king-sized bed and a view of the city, asked Jack. Double occupancy? Excuse me? Will this room be for 2? Just one person, me, said Jack, deciding to have some fun with the girl. That is, unless of course you'd like to join with me. Sarah? He asked, noticing her name tag. Sarah started to blush a little. I have just the room for you right here, Mr. Kettle. Room number 435 with a king bed, HD TV plus a kitchenette. How will that be? Sounds wonderful, Sarah, said Jack. Right then, Mr. Kettle, room 435 with a king bed and kitchenette for 2 nights will be $532. I'll just need some ID and a credit card. Jack paused a moment, then took out his wallet. Here's my ID, and I'll be paying with cash, he added, laying $600 on the counter. By the way, I'm starving. What would you recommend being the best place to eat around here? Well, sir, I would recommend the Bacchanal Buffet. They have over 500 different items you can choose from, and it's rated one of the best buffets in all of Las Vegas. You can easily find it right across on the other side of the entranceway. Thank you, Sarah. I think I will try it. Here's your room card, Mr. Kettle. By the way, Mr. Kettle, do you have a total rewards card? Jack gave her a puzzled look and slowly shook his head. No, what's that? Go straight over to the customer service desk right over there, pointed Sarah. Tell them you want to sign up for a Total Rewards Club card. It will give you discounts on meals and other items in and around the palace. Plus, you a squoo, it will help you keep track of your winnings and points here at the palace. Why, thank you. You're welcome and enjoy your stay at Caesar's Palace, Mr. Kettle. Please, just call me Jack. Jack picked up his room card off of the desk and his backpack up off the floor and headed for the nearest elevator to find his room for a long-awaited and much-needed shower. Later that evening, after trying his hand at nearly every game there was in the casino, Jack finally settled down at one of the blackjack tables in the middle of a large room and was ahead nearly 3,000 for the evening when he suddenly heard a familiar voice calling out his name from behind. Jack Kettle, is that you? Asked the high-pitched female voice. No way. You've got to be kidding. It can't be, thought Jack as he turned around in his seat to see who it was. At this point in the evening, even the task of turning around in his seat was challenging since he was already well on his way to finishing his 4th complimentary gin and tonic. Jen, what are you doing here? He asked. A stupid question, he suddenly realized, as he remembered Jennifer telling him a few days ago back at the office that she had taken time off work to go to Las Vegas with her new boyfriend. Jack began unconsciously straightening his hair with his fingers and patting down the front, back, and sides of his shirt. There stood Jennifer Kinsley before him, dressed in a long, black, velvety-looking evening dress. Jack could only imagine that it must be some kind of foreign designer dress that she had picked up from one of the expensive women's stores in downtown Chicago before she left town. He hadn't realized it at first, as he caught his eyes moving up and down the dress a bit more than he usually allowed in the past. Jen caught his eye movement and motioned upward. Well, Jack, the better question is, what you are doing here. Everyone at the office has been worried about you all week long and wondering what on earth had happened to you, Jen explained. It's like you fell off the face of the friggin' planet, Jack, said Jen. Jack stepped over and gave Jen a huge hug. Damn good to see you, Jen. I didn't realize you cared. I got to admit, seeing you at first was, well, quite a surprise. Jack stepped back a second and smiled. By the way, that dress looks great on you. So tell me, how's the trip with your boyfriend going so far? Are you two married yet? Jennifer stood silent for a moment as she looked Jack over, trying hard to figure the whole situation out. Well, Jen, are you done with your card game, Jack? Jen asked, deliberately changing the subject. Yeah, mostly, I guess. Where's your boyfriend? What's his name? Michael. Yeah, Michael. Where is he? He's over that way somewhere, playing the slot machines with some friends. Well, great. Let's celebrate. How about I buy you two a drink? Offered Jack. Sure, why not? Said Jen, looking critically at Jack. Let's meet at Cleopatra's barge in about 15 minutes. Sound good? I'll meet you over there. Jen started to turn and leave, but stopped herself. Oh, and Jack, I want to hear everything about what's been going on with you the last few days. Understand? I'll meet you over at the barge, Jack continued, as he started collecting up his winnings from the blackjack table. And then I'll tell you the whole story. Chapter 7: Cleopatra's Barge. Jack had found a small table just inside the entrance of the nightclub, often referred to simply as the barge. As soon as he sat down, he ordered another gin and tonic and waited for Jen and her boyfriend to arrive. It was late in the evening, yet there was still a significant crowd of people still sitting inside the bar, even at this late hour. Jack checked his watch. Already past midnight, he marveled. Jack realized time has no meaning when you're in Las Vegas. There had been a DJ playing songs earlier before Jack sat down, but apparently he was taking a break for the time being. Just then, Jack caught sight of Jen at the entrance of the bar and waved her over. She was alone. Can I get you something to drink? He asked as she approached his table. Please, a rum and coke. Jack stood and let Jen sit down, then looked around for a waiter or waitress, but decided it would just be quicker to get the drink at the bar himself. I'll be right back. How about Michael? What does he drink? Jack asked. He might be here later. I would hold on his, replied Jen, somewhat hesitantly. Okay then. A few minutes later, Jack returned with two drinks, setting the rum and coke he had ordered in front of Jen, and then he placed the second drink next to his old glass as he sat down across from Jen. So how are things going, Jen? I thought by now you two would have been married already. What happened? Jack asked. Jen smiled meekly and then picked up her drink as she swallowed half the glass before setting it back down on the small round table. He could tell something was bothering her. Wow, maybe I should have ordered you two drinks instead of one, Jen laughed nervously. Maybe you should have. She paused a moment, then continued. No, Jack, I think you should tell me first. What are you doing here in Las Vegas? I mean, I'm sure everyone back in Chicago is wondering where the hell you are. Fair enough, said Jack as he picked up his old drink glass, deciding it was time to finish the rest of his drink off. Have you ever had one of those days when you wake up in the morning wondering who you are and whose life you're living? Jen's eyes widened as she stared into her glass. He had caught her by surprise. She wasn't prepared for such a deep conversation. Guess not. Well, this last week or two was full of mornings like that for me. It was like someone above was sending me signals. It just took a little extra nudge to get me started. It was more like a slap on the head with a 2x4, he thought, but he decided not to get into all the gory details right now. But Jack, as long as I've known you, you've always struck me as a real straight-laced, level-headed sort of guy. Not the kind of guy that would just pack up everything and leave town, leave his job and his family with no explanation, without any warning at all. Jen hesitated and then continued, leaning in closer. Were you and your wife having problems, Jack? No, it wasn't like that at all. I really didn't pack up much, let me tell you. Well, what happened then? Tell me. Jack went silent, unable to speak, reaching up and raking his fingers through his hair, which was one of his usual nervous habits when he reached a sensitive subject. Jen, the other morning on the way to work, I watched my best friend Peter die right in front of me. 1 minute he was driving next to me in his car. We talked for a minute about getting together later, and then wham! Next thing I know, he gets sideswiped by a bus. If I'd have left the light another second or two earlier, it might have been both of us. It happened Wednesday morning when I was driving to work late, and then, I don't know, watching him pass in front of me and not being able to do a think about it was like, he paused a moment, like part of me died inside, just like Peter. I'm so sorry, Jack. I didn't know, so tell me about you and your friend Peter, she started, but was cut off. Enough about me. What about you, Jen? It's your turn, insisted Jack. Jen looked around to see if Michael was anywhere nearby. This was the third time Jack had noticed her looking around for him. This whole trip to Vegas was sort of Michael's idea. I just kind of went along with it because it sounded like it would be fun. I've always been a sort of homebody. I went to college straight out of high school for 4 years. Then I've been working full-time ever since. Never taken the time to get wild, as they say. Really? Asked Jack, with a hint of sarcasm. Yeah, really. What, you think I'm like that? Jen asked, hands on her hips. Jack gave her a look of disbelief. He shook his head. Maybe that's what Michael was thinking. Maybe you're right. I know a lot of people don't believe it, but I'm really a down-to-earth kind of girl. At first, this trip seemed like it would be fun. Go to Vegas for a few days, visit with Michael's family and friends. It was Michael who wanted to turn the whole damn thing into a wedding and honeymoon trip, not me. This really struck me odd too, because from the moment Michael and I first met and started dating each other, he was always adamant about not getting serious. How did you and Michael meet? Asked Jack. He's friends with some big wig in the company, I guess. A Western regional manager, what's his name? Jen paused a moment to remember. Kyle, that's who. Kyle Burton and Morgan are old friends, and I guess Kyle knows Michael's family too. Jack raised his eyebrows slightly as he started putting things together. Well, that explains something that Morgan was asking me about earlier. So what's going on with Michael then? Is that why he's not here? Is he mad at you for some reason? Jen finished off her rum and coke. Mostly he's mad at me because I don't want to get married right now. He's acting like, if it isn't now, it's never going to happen for us. But I'm not. Jen paused and stared into her empty glass. You're not what? I'm not sure that Michael is the guy I want to spend the rest of my life with. Besides, his family and his friends. Jen suddenly got a serious look on her face. What's the matter? Asked Jack. They are all so serious about everything. They don't like me being around him. They all give me the creeps too. Jack looked confused. I don't understand, Jen, how that makes a difference on this trip. Did they come along with you guys on this trip then? No, they all live here, Jack. Michael is originally from here, you see. I see. Jack noticed a waitress coming over and waved her down. Would you like another drink, Jen? One more, please. Thank you. The waitress came over, and Jack ordered 2 more drinks. Then he noticed 3 men standing outside the entrance to Cleopatra's barge as the waitress turned and left. So, I take it that things aren't going that well then. I'm sorry, Jen. Hey, Jack, no need to apologize. It's better to find out early, right? Yeah, I guess so, said Jack. Better to find out what you want in life while you're young. Before you get old, like me, smiled Jack. You're not so old, Jack. Why? If you weren't married already, I would have tried harder to get your attention, if you know what I mean. The waitress returned with their drinks, as Jen downed half of it before it even hit the table. Easy, Jen. You're going to get yourself wasted at that rate. My plan exactly, she said, smiling broadly. Speaking of plans, what are your plans for the rest of the weekend? Just hang out here for a few days, and then maybe ride out to Colorado and do a little mountain climbing. That's right, I remember. We bought you that mountain pack for your birthday. I thought that was crazy since you never struck me as that kind of guy. Jack gave Jen a faked expression of hurt. You just don't know me. That's all, Jack started to explain until he noticed the 3 large men were now standing inside the bar. Hey, Jen, I got to ask you, is that your boyfriend Michael over there? Jen turned around to look and became instantly agitated. Yes, that's Michael, remarked Jen, quickly turning back around, along with his brother and some old high school friend. Jack watched as the 3 men began looking over everyone in the bar. One of the men, the tall, muscular one, the one Jack guessed to be Michael, stepped first into the area where they were seated. Looking at the 3 of them from a distance reminded Jack of a scene from one of his favorite classic movies. Michael's last name wouldn't happen to be Corleone, would it? Asked Jack sarcastically. Who's that? You never saw the movie The Godfather? Asked Jack. Jen shook her head. Never mind, mumbled Jack as he stood up to greet the taller man who was approaching their table. No, his last name is Vicente, Jen muttered. Jack started to extend his hand. Hi, you must be Michael, he said, holding out his right hand. My name's Jack Kettle. Would you like a drink? The tall man stopped suddenly a few feet away from Jack. His expression was a strange mixture of both anxiety and anger. Michael never moved his hand from his side. "Yeah, I'm Michael," he hissed as he shot an angry glance over at Jen, who was sipping quietly on her drink. "Geese," thought Jack. "I wonder what his problem is." "Nice to meet you, Michael," offered Jack. "Yeah, whatever. Jen, we need to get going. It's late," Michael barked. Jen stood up, finished her drink, set it on the table, and smoothed out her black evening dress. Damn, she really looked good, thought Jack. Got to keep my thoughts to myself around this goon, though. He looks like he's about to go berserk. "Hey, well, it's been nice meeting you, Michael. Maybe we can get together for a drink later on sometime," offered Jack. "Yeah, maybe not," growled Michael, shooting another angry glance over at Jen as she walked away. She stopped a moment and turned around. "I think that's a great idea, Jack. Maybe when Michael sobers up and calms down, we can get together for drinks or something." Jen turned again and passed the other two as she left the bar. Jack stood near the table and watched as Jen left. A moment later, he turned around and placed some money on the table to pay for all the drinks. As Jack turned around once again, he noticed that Michael had taken off behind Jen, but the other two who came in with Michael were still standing inside the bar near Jack's table. As Jack started to leave, one of the men put the palm of his hand out, stopping Jack. "We have a suggestion for you, Mr. Jack. Whoever you are, stay away from Jen. You got that?" barked the shorter man, who looked like he could have been Michael's brother. Jack wasn't about to ask. He nodded his head as the men turned to leave. Vicente, Vicente. Now, why did that name ring a bell? He would have to find out later. Right now, he was tired and ready to go to bed. Tomorrow was already here, and he was too tired to play any more games. Chapter 8. What Happens in Vegas. The next morning, Jack awoke and opened his sleepy eyes as they caught the morning sun glaring in through the tall glass windows of his hotel room. For several minutes, he lay there, half conscious, wondering why he hadn't thought to close the curtains in his room the night before. He suddenly then remembered it was because it was already dark when he had checked in yesterday, which now seemed like a week ago. Glancing over at the clock radio next to his bed, he noticed the time was 8:30. Too early. Still need more sleep, he thought. Lying motionless for several minutes, Jack finally slid his legs slowly out from under the covers and stepped out of his bed, standing up to face the morning sun. Wobbling his head slightly as he stood up, he reached up and pressed both hands to the sides of his head, as if his head were about to fall off, which is exactly how it felt. "Oh, Jack, what were you thinking? Gin and tonics always do this to you," he mumbled. Jack staggered over to his backpack and began shuffling through its contents for several minutes, until he finally gave up. "Why didn't you think to buy some Tylenol, or aspirin at least?" he thought. He staggered again over to the window as he pulled the curtains closed, and then back into bed he plopped himself, still pressing his hands tightly to the sides of his head. As he lay there, he began to relive the events of the last few days in his head. Skipping over all the unpleasant parts, he finally got to the many hours he spent alone driving his bike down the open road. Just then, he heard someone knocking on his door. Not sure if the sound was real or imaginary, he pulled his hands off his head for a moment, while he stuck his pinky in his right ear and twisted it around. No sounds were heard. Must have been the gin and tonic, he thought as he closed his eyes again. Again, he heard the knocking sound at his door, but much louder this time, as if it were impatient with him. Jack unwillingly stood up out of bed and staggered through the darkness to the door. "Who disturbs my slumber?" he growled, recalling a line from one of his daughter's favorite Disney movies. He peeked out to see who it was. Jen? He thought, how did she find my room? He wondered. I don't remember giving her my room number. Or maybe I did. I did have a lot to drink after all. Jack opened his door, and there was Jen standing outside in the hallway, looking around frantically from side to side, still wearing the same black velvety dress as she had on the evening before. "Good morning, Jen. What's up?" Jack wheezed, trying hard to keep his eyes open. He stood patiently waiting for a reply as she continued to look nervously up and down the corridor outside the room. Looking down at himself for a moment, he suddenly realized he was only wearing boxer shorts and socks. Just then, a small group of people stepped out into the hallway from one of the nearby rooms and passed behind Jen as they headed for the elevator at the end of the hall. They barely seemed to take notice of him or Jen at all as they passed by laughing and continuing with their conversation all the way down the corridor. Deciding the coast was clear, Jen looked directly at Jack. Jack, she started to speak, then suddenly noticed his attire. I need to talk to you. May I come in for a moment? She asked. How did you find my room, Jen? Jack asked groggily. Sorry, Jack. I asked the hotel clerk. I told them we worked together, and I desperately needed to ask you some questions, but I had forgotten your room number. Jack stared at her, giving her the hairy eyeball. Please, Jack, it's important. Come on in. Just give me a minute to throw something on. Thank you, Jack, she said. Jack reached over by the door and flipped on the light switch, and then quickly grabbed his backpack as Jen stepped inside the room and shut the door. A few moments later, after getting dressed and washing up, Jack stepped out of the bathroom and saw Jen staring out the windows with the curtains wide open again. Such a beautiful city. You can see for miles on a day like today, remarked Jen as she gazed out the window. Blinking in the bright light. So what's going on, Jen? You look like you've been out all night. Have you had any sleep at all? He asked. Now it was Jen's turn to give Jack the hairy eyeball. Hardly. Michael and I spent the whole night fighting. Again. Fighting? What about? He's still insisting that we should go and get married today. Jen began pacing back and forth in front of the windows. Did you tell him how you feel about that? Does he know you're not ready to get married right now? You don't understand, Jack. Michael's the kind of guy that doesn't take no for an answer. He's so possessive. I've never seen him act like this before. All night he was yelling at me and calling me names, blaming this whole thing on me. Jack decided to sit down in one of the desk chairs in the hotel room, rubbing his eyes as he thought. By the way, Jen, I've got to ask you. You said Michael was from Vegas, right? Right. All night long I was thinking, why does his last name keep ringing a bell? Vicente. It's like I've heard that name somewhere before. Jack tilted his head down as he ran his fingers through his hair. Maybe it's because his family owns a couple of casinos here in town, offered Jen. Jack's eyes opened wide as he suddenly remembered a major news story that came out a few years back about a huge political scandal involving certain Nevada politicians and Las Vegas casino owners. Jack shook his head. Jen, you sure know how to pick 'em. Why is that? Your friend Michael is from a family that is accustomed to getting their way. So what should I do now, Jack? Jen asked, still nervously pacing by the windows. Where's Michael at? He's probably looking for me downstairs in the casino right now. My advice, Jen, if I were you, I'd go back to my hotel room and get my stuff and call a taxi to take me to the airport. You mean go back home? Well, yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. Jen stopped her pacing as she turned around to stare out the window. You're probably right, Jack. Michael isn't going to be happy about it, though. Jack stood up and walked over to the window. You know, sometimes you just have to do things that are right for you, regardless of the consequences, for your own sanity. Jen turned back around to face Jack, who was now staring out the window as well. Like when you left Chicago and didn't tell anyone where you were, or where you were going, or why. Jen raised her hand and placed it on Jack's shoulder. What about you, Jack? When are you going to go home again? Or are you just going to keep running? Jack sighed. For the first time in many days since Peter's accident, Jack began to realize that all he was doing was just running away from his problems. Now that he had a few days alone, a few days in which to collect his thoughts, he realized that Jen was right. He was running away to avoid dealing with the pain of his best friend's death, as well as running away to avoid confronting those he loved most, to make changes in the way they had been living their lives for the last 10 years. Sorry, Jack. I don't mean to pry. I'm glad you were here. Thank you for helping me. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't. Jen moved closer to Jack and kissed him gently on the cheek. You're a good man, Jack. Any woman would be lucky to have you. Jack looked at her for a moment, silently considering returning her kiss. Thanks, Jen, he replied softly, as a multitude of thoughts danced in his head. Part of him wanted to take hold of Jen and comfort her as well. He suddenly realized that not only was he running from his problems, but he was also running from his own fears. Fears of getting old and living his life halfway. As much as he was attracted to Jen and felt desire for her, he knew deep inside that to pursue that desire would most likely be a mistake. Suddenly, he began to feel things inside again. He realized he really missed Julie. He missed holding her in his arms, and he missed the kids. Maybe, he thought, it was time to stop running and go home again. He only hoped that they would forgive him for all this and feel the same. Just then, they heard a loud knock on the door of the room. The two stared at each other for a moment with widening eyes. "Oh no," Jack quietly mumbled. He walked over to the door and looked through the peephole. "It's your boyfriend Michael and his two friends." Jen tiptoed over and then peeked in the hole. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What do we do now?" "What do you mean we don't drag me into this?" Jack protested half-jokingly. The knocking continued, much louder this time. "Maybe they will go away if we ignore them," Jan said, backing up from the door. "Hardly, Jen. Here, get in the bathroom and shut the door," Jack whispered as he pushed her gently into the bathroom, closing the door quietly behind her. "Now, be quiet," he said to her, just before closing the door. Then Jack opened the door of the room. "Hey, Michael, what's up?" "I've been looking all over for Jen. Have you seen her?" "I haven't seen her since we were at the barge last night having drinks." "Why? Is everything okay? Is she all right?" "Yeah, everything's fine. If you do happen to see her, tell her I'm playing the poker tables downstairs, or she can just call my cell phone." "Sure, Michael, I will." "Thanks." Michael turned around to leave, but not before his brother and friend looked Jack and the inside of his room over one more time. Suspiciously, Jack shut the door, then waited a second or two and then tapped gently on the bathroom door. "Well, the coast is clear, Jen." Jen stepped out of the bathroom and immediately ran to look out the peephole. "I better get going, I guess." "So what do you want to do, Jen?" "I'm going to go find Michael and tell him I'm ready to go home." Jen turned around and faced Jack. "I'm not ready to get married," she said, standing tall and speaking up boldly as she said the words, as if practicing delivering a speech. "If you want me, you will just have to wait for me to be ready. Now, take me home." Jen paused and looked at Jack. "There, did that sound confident and determined?" "Yeah, but I would keep working on it." Jen turned and started to open the door, but not before kissing Jack last time on the cheek. "Thanks, Jack. Wish me luck." Jack grabbed her shoulder gently before she turned around for the door. "Good luck, but just in case things don't go the way you hope they will, call me." Jack turned around and went to his backpack, then stopped suddenly. "Crap, I forgot," Jack muttered after realizing he no longer had a cell phone. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. I was just thinking that if things don't go the way you hope they will, call me, call my room." "Where's your cell phone?" Jen asked. "I threw it away a few days ago." "Smart move, Jack," Jen said sarcastically. "So, what about you, Jack? What are you going to do then?" "I'm going home. I'm going to clean up, grab some breakfast, and get back on the road and head back home. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do." This time it was Jack's turn to sound as if he were practicing a speech. "Keep working on it," she said, smiling. "Well, you said something a little while ago that started me thinking," Jack continued. "You asked me when I was going to stop running away and go home again. That's when I realized I was just running away from my problems." Jen chuckled. "Kind of funny. Here you've been running away from your problems, while I've just been running right into them, both of us hoping they will just go away." "Yep, you're right. Just like that," replied Jack, opening the door of his room for Jen. "Goodbye, Jack. I'll see you when you get back in Chicago. Maybe." Maybe's right, that is, if my wife and if Morgan will all take me back. Jen left the room as Jack stepped out into the hallway, watching her as she headed down the corridor to the elevator. Jack quietly stood there a moment, alone in his thoughts, as she stepped into the elevator. He started to turn around and go back into his room as he felt someone's hand, stopping him from behind. "Not so fast, Jack. Where do you think you're going?" asked a somewhat familiar voice. Jack turned around to see Michael's friend Dominic and his brother Tony blocking his way to the door of his hotel room. "Well, hey, good morning," So, what's new with you guys? Asked Jack, trying to act innocent. Your memory ain't so good, Jack, said the taller man, the one that Jack remembered to be Michael's best friend. Remember, last night we told you to stay away from Jen, but it seems like you didn't listen. Hey, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your names. The shorter but more muscular of the two men, Michael's brother reached out suddenly with one hand, grabbing Jack tightly around the throat. My name's Antonio Vicente, or you can just call me Tony. Nice to meet you, Tony, replied a raspy-voiced Jack. Tony, I know what you're thinking, but it's not how it seems, Jack began to explain. Tell your brother Michael that Jen was just coming in to talk with me. She just needed some advice. That's all. Jack tried to gauge the reaction of the two men, but they didn't seem to buy his story. Advice? Oh, and I suppose that's why you came all the way here from Chicago to Las Vegas. Just to give Jen some advice? Well, no, not exactly. Jack thought for a moment that he might try to explain to Tony why he was really in Vegas, but realized the story would have been even more difficult to explain and even harder to believe. And I suppose that's why you just happened to book a room at the very same hotel as Jen was at in Las Vegas. Of all the places you could have booked a room just to give her some advice? Well, no, not exactly, Jack muttered. Jack suddenly began to realize how unbelievable his story was and where this conversation was leading. Well, Jack, today's your lucky day. We are going to give you some advice, too. Suddenly, Jack felt a sharp pain in his stomach as all the wind in his lungs rushed out and darkness overcame him. By the time he came to seconds later, he was curled up on the floor of the hallway in front of his hotel room, looking up at Michael's brother standing over him, with the lights on the ceiling casting a shadow around his face. Oh, great. Why does it seem like my luck has suddenly run out? Jack thought. Jack, if you know what's good for you, leave now and go home to Chicago and don't show your face around here again. Got it? Yeah, I got it, moaned Jack as he watched the two men turn around and head down the hallway. Oh, Jack, how did you get yourself into this mess? He groaned softly to no one particular. Moments later, as Jack peeled his body up off the floor of the hallway and returned to the safety of his hotel room, he began pulling out the last of his clean clothes from his backpack as he headed for the shower. It was time to go home, he decided, and now was as good a time as any. Chapter 9. Decisions. Decisions. As the elevator doors parted and Jen stepped out into the lobby of the casino, she realized that it might be better for her to go up to the room and get her clothes packed up first before facing Michael with the news. She liked Michael and really had wanted the relationship to work out from the beginning, but as his true nature began to reveal itself, she realized that he was just far too possessive. In the last few days, there was a darker side to Michael's personality that she had never seen before while they were in Chicago. It scared her. She briefly scanned the floor of the casino where the poker tables were, but did not see Michael anywhere around. But since it was a big casino, this didn't surprise her. He could be anywhere. She turned around and got back on the elevator, returning to her room to gather and pack her belongings. When she stepped into the room, there was Michael sitting at the desk waiting for her. "Where have you been?" hissed Michael. Jen hesitated a moment as she slowly gathered up her courage. "I've been walking around thinking." "About what?" "About us, Michael. That's what." Michael stood up, facing Jen. He had an odd expression on his face that she had never seen before. It appeared to be a strange mixture of anxiety and fear, combined with controlled anger. And for a moment, Michael reminded her of her mother's old pressure cooker, as if he too were just one click away from exploding. "I've been thinking about us too. I love you, Jen. You know that." He paused a second and continued on with a softer voice. "I know where you were." "And what, you're following me around now?" "So what's going on with you and this Jack guy?" he asked. "Nothing is going on with us, Michael. He's just a friend that I work with out in Chicago." "Come on, you expect me to believe that?" "Yeah, I do, because it's the truth." Just then, a funny expression came across his face as Michael began to reach into his back pocket for something. For a moment, Jen froze, not sure of what to expect next. "Oh God, I'm too young to die this way," she thought, as Michael pulled a small box out and then slowly got down on one knee in the middle of the room. You know, it's okay. I don't care about Jack. I just want you to know how much I love you and how I want to make you the happiest girl in the world. Michael continued, holding the box up in the air and opening it up to reveal a diamond ring. Will you marry me, Jen? He asked. Still frozen, Jen's has this strange feeling as if her life was flashing before her eyes. Where moments earlier she had been courageous and determined, now she was shy and unsure. The speech that she had been preparing for Michael in her head, now suddenly erased from memory. Just then, she heard a sound at the door as she turned around to see Tony and his friend Dominic standing just outside. Tony nodded slightly at his brother. It's all been taken care of, Michael, reported Tony. Very good. Thanks, bro. Jen turned around again to face Michael. What's been taken care of? She asked, worried for a moment at Michael's response. For the first time, she saw a smile on Michael's face form as he flipped his dark hair back. I've reserved the chapel for us this morning from 11 till noon. I've even hired a chaplain to be there, and I've even picked out a dress for you to wear. Michael motioned to the closet in the hotel room and slid the door open to reveal a long, white wedding dress covered in small pearls and diamonds stitched into the dress, and held it out to Jen. I even had it specially sized just for you. Michael? Jen whined as she started to protest, but quickly decided it best not to whine now as Michael's brother Tony suddenly spoke up from behind. She heard Tony cracking his knuckles. We also had a little chat with her friend. He won't be giving her any more advice today either. So, what do you think, Jen? Asked Michael, reaching into the closet and holding up the dress. I think, she started, trying to unscramble the multitude of thoughts in her mind. I think it's very beautiful, Michael. You're such a coward, Jen, she thought to herself. Jen glanced quickly over at the clock radio on the bed. It was now 10:15. Whatever you're going to do, Jen, you better do it fast, she thought. Jen forced a smile towards Michael. Honey, I really need to shower and clean up first. Can you give me about 20 minutes or so to get ready? Michael smiled at Jen, a strange sort of smile she had never seen before. It was like a little boy who had finally gotten his way. Of course, take whatever time you need to get ready. Tony and I will go downstairs and make the necessary preparations at the chapel, while you take a shower and get dressed. Don't worry about the dress either. I gave the lady in the dress shop one of your other dresses so she could size it for you. Jen forced another smile as she realized he thought of everything. Michael handed the wedding dress over to Jen as he walked over to the door and joined his brother, who was standing just outside. Oh, sweetheart, when you're done, Dominic here will escort you to the chapel. Michael started to leave as he continued. I just can't wait until you and I can be together as husband and wife. You're going to make me the happiest man in the world. As Michael and his brother turned and walked down the corridor, Jen pushed the door shut on Dominic, who was standing just outside. Now she was alone, finally. She walked back into the room as she stared glumly at the white wedding dress she was holding. It was beautiful, she had to admit, but it just wasn't her. None of this whole trip was her idea of the kind of wedding she'd wanted. Suddenly, Jen felt like a prisoner, confined to some kind of wedding nightmare-like game, dreamed up by Michael and his friends. Well, she wasn't going to be playing along. She quickly tossed the dress onto the bed, as if discarding a piece of trash in a dumpster. Now, Jen, you've got 20 minutes to think of way out of this mess, she thought. Jack had nearly finished throwing the last of his dirty clothes into his backpack and was about to zip it up when the phone near his bed began to ring. He stared at the phone for a few seconds, unsure of whether he should answer it or not. Hello? He answered, keeping his voice as nondescript as possible. Jack, is that you? Asked Jen on the other end of the line. Jen, what going on? Have you and Michael had a chance to straighten things out yet? Not exactly, no. What do you mean, not exactly? Well, for one, he went and bought a white wedding dress for me to wear, and then he reserved the chapel for a wedding this morning. And now, he has one of his thugs, Dominic, outside my door to escort me to the chapel in order that I won't run away. So I guess you could say that we haven't had a chance to straighten things out yet. Jen sighed. Wow, Jen, you really know how to pick 'em, teased Jack. Thanks a lot. I need your help, Jack, pleaded Jen. Michael's expecting me to be at the chapel in 5 minutes, all dressed and ready to get married. I don't want to get married, Jack. Calm down. What's your room number, Jen? It's a number 516, Jack. One floor above you. Gotcha. I'll be there in 2 minutes. When you hear Dominic start talking, open the door. Then what do we do? How the hell should I know? We'll just have to figure that out as we go along. Just make sure you have all your stuff packed up and ready to... Click. Suddenly the phone line went dead. For a moment, Jen was stunned as she heard a voice chime in over the receiver. Jen, are you ready to go? Don't waste time on the phone, sweetheart. We're down here in the chapel waiting for you. How did he do that? Jen wondered. Then she remembered that Michael had a lot of friends in this city, and some of those friends could probably help him do a lot of things she didn't know about yet. Yeah, Michael, I'm just about ready. I've got your dress on, and I will be coming down in just a few minutes, okay? Okay, sweetheart, I'll be waiting. Can't wait to see you in that dress. Click. The call ended as Jen hung up the receiver. Suddenly, she heard a commotion just outside her door. She ran over to the door and placed her ear against side. She could hear Dominic's voice the loudest. Hey, we told you to stay away from Jen and not to show your face around here. But you don't seem to listen very well, mister, roared Dominic. Suddenly, Jen swung open the door of her room, just enough to distract Dominic for a split second, and long enough for Jack to use a pewter candlestick from one of the tables down the hallway and swing it against the side of Dominic's head. Thwop! Down he went. Thud! Jack! Screamed Jen, staring at Dominic, who now lay motionless on the hallway floor. Jack gave her a look of disbelief. We need to get going, girly girl, insisted Jack, pointing at Dominic. He's not going to be in a good mood when he wakes up, and by that time, I'm planning to be long gone from here. They heard a low moan from the floor below them. Jen grabbed her purse from inside the hotel room, and the two of them ran down the hallway to the nearest elevator. As they entered the elevator, Jack reached over and punched the button that would take them down to the lobby. Suddenly, Jen reached over and threw both her arms around Jack as she gave him a big hug. Thank you so much, Jack. You saved me. Don't thank just me yet. We still have to get out of here. I know, but still. How do I get myself into these messes? Jen shrieked, picking her purse up from the floor of the elevator. I hope you don't mind riding double on a motorcycle, said Jack, noticing that Jen hadn't exactly picked out riding attire. Jen gave him a weird look. You mean to tell me that all you brought with you from Chicago were dresses? No blue jeans or t-shirts? Come on, Jack. It's Las Vegas. Jen shot Jack a funny look, rolling her eyes slightly. Jack just shook his head. By the way, Jack, could you help me finish zipping up the back of my dress? I didn't have time back in the room to do it. And well, you know we were in sort of a big hurry there for a minute. Sure thing. Turn around, said Jack, pulling the zipper up on the back of her dress. Thanks, Jack, said Jen. The moment Jack was finished, she turned around to embrace him once again. I just don't know what I'd have done without your help. Apparently distracted, the two of them hadn't been watching as the elevator made an unexpected stop at the first floor, which just happened to open to the main lobby. Before they had a chance, the elevator doors slid apart, and there stood Tony, waiting outside, with his arms folded across his chest. He had been waiting for Dominic and Jen to arrive, but instead he saw Jack and Jen side by side in the elevator with Jen's arms around Jack's shoulders. The three of them stood in stunned silence for a split second. Jack looked at Jen, then smiled and waved to Tony. Hey, Tony, it's Jack, remember me? It's nice to see you again. Then, before Tony could even react, he quickly reached over and smacked the button on the panel, closing the doors to take them down the rest of the way to the lower lobby. The moment they reached the lobby, Jack grabbed Jen's hand. We've got to get moving, Jen. The parking garage is on the other side of the hotel. Jen nodded, grabbed her bag, and held it tightly around her shoulders as the two of them walked quickly through the crowd. Halfway to the parking garage, they heard an announcement coming over the hotel sound system. Security report immediately to lower level. Security to lower level. The message repeated several times in the background. Jack started to pick up his pace. Come on, Jen. It's time to run. Jack, please slow down. I can't run any faster in these shoes. The heels are just. Jen started to plead, but was cut off as Jack suddenly stopped and reached down and tore off her shoes, throwing them aside, startling an older couple who had been playing one of the large slot machines near the last door to the parking lot entrance. From somewhere behind them, they heard a man shouting, "Hey, you two, stop!" Jen turned around to see two men dressed in dark suits heading rapidly towards them. You don't think those men are yelling at us, do you, Jack? She asked. Jack grabbed her hand and took off. Looks like Michael's set his hounds on us. Run faster, Jen. They ran their way through the crowds and through the doors leading out to the parking garage as Jack immediately began scanning for his bike. Luckily, he was able to park it in one of the smaller spots closer to the hotel. As he reached into his pocket and grabbed his key. Hop on and hold on tight, yelled Jack as he slipped his helmet on over his head and started up the bike, throttling it a few times. Jen climbed on, apprehensively at first. I think you should know, Jack. I've never ridden on a motorcycle before. My best friend in high school, Sally Ann Jenkins, well, she was always like your typical biker chic, and her boyfriend Alex rode a motorcycle to school every day, and one day they asked me if... Jen, if you wouldn't mind, shut up and hold on tight, hollered Jack from the front seat. Jack peeled out just as the two men in dark suits came running through the doors. One had a pistol out and was yelling at Jack, while the other had a two-way radio in his hand. Jen waved at the man with the radio as they rode by. Tell Michael that Jen said, "No thanks," she hollered as Jack quickly sped away down the exit ramp of the parking garage back onto the main street. Chapter 10, Time to Leave. Several minutes later, and putting several miles behind them, Jack raced through the city on the motorcycle. Finally, after deciding that they had gone a safe enough distance and there was no longer any likelihood of Michael or his friends following them, Jack noticed a parking lot near a large local supermarket and pulled in. After stopping and removing his helmet, Jack climbed off the motorcycle and took a few moments to carefully look around, still not entirely confident that they had completely managed to elude Michael. Well, it looks like you're finally a free woman, offered Jack, wiping the sweat off his forehead. He took notice of Jen's dazed expression. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks again, Jack, for helping me. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here to help me. Jen stepped off the back of the bike and suddenly remembered her new shoes were gone. But really, did you have to throw them away? Jen whined half-jokingly as she started digging through her clothes bag for more shoes. Suddenly, she realized she had left something important back in the hotel room. The rest of my clothes are still in my suitcase, and that's sitting on my bed up in the hotel room. You want me to turn around and take you back? He asked. Jen gave him a dirty look as she silently continued shuffling through her bag. I didn't think so. Just take me to the airport, Jack. I'll hop the first flight out of here to Chicago, and then I'll be out of your way, insisted Jen, sarcastically. Fine, but first, have you forgotten? You're still wearing the wedding dress Michael bought for you. We need to go and find you some shoes and, well, more suitable clothes to wear. You know, wedding dresses aren't exactly the best attire to ride on a motorcycle with, or even ride on an airplane for that matter, insisted Jack. I see a couple of stores over there in that shopping mall. We should be able to find some shoes for you and, well, better clothes for you to wear. Jen quickly started off to the nearest store she could see when she suddenly stopped. Oh no, you're not going to believe this, she said. What's the matter now? My plane ticket, it's still in my suitcase. Jen threw her hands in the air as if to surrender. I give up. It's just not my day. It's okay, Jen. It's just as well. You'll have to buy a new ticket anyway. I don't think Michael would let you use the ticket he brought for the trip home anyway. You do have your credit cards with you, right? Yes, Jack. They're in my little bag here, she answered sarcastically. As she started walking, she stopped again. You don't suppose Michael and his friends will be watching for me at the airport, do you? Jack looked up in the sky, running his fingers through his hair. I don't know, Jen. Michael seemed desperate to keep you here no matter what. I wouldn't put anything past him. After how he acted back at the hotel, nothing would surprise me. But trying anything at the airport, well, that would be stupid on his part. Still, I suggest we try something to throw him off your trail. Like what? Jack stood staring up at the sky again, alone in his thoughts. How do I get myself into these things, he wondered. Do you know anyone who lives here in Vegas, other than Michael, that is? No, the closest relative I have is my sister Janice. She lives south of here, in a little town in Arizona. A little town where in Arizona? Asked Jack. Some little town north of Phoenix. Wickenburg, I think it is. Jack nodded as he began running his fingers through his hair again, a habit of his whenever he was deep in thought, or in this case, trying to decide just how much more to get involved in Jen's personal affairs. He leveled his eyes at Jen. Tell you what, I can get you there. That is, if you don't mind riding for a few hours on that thing, said Jack, motioning to his motorcycle. It's probably about a 3, maybe 4-hour ride from here. We could be at your sister's house by, Jack looked at his watch and continued. We could be there by, say, 3:30 or so. Why don't you give your sister a call and make sure she's home first? Good idea, Jack. Jen reached inside her bag and took out her cell phone. This was where Jen made her first big mistake. After turning it on, she then called her sister Janice, who turned out was home. After working out the details, Jen ended the phone call with her sister and then placed the phone back into her bag, leaving her phone on, which was to be her second big mistake. Jen looked up again at Jack. She had a huge smile on her face. Thank you, Jack, exclaimed Jen, jumping up and down. That was a great idea. If you can drive me down there this afternoon, then Janice said that we are welcomed to spend the night at her house, and she will drive me into Phoenix tomorrow morning and help get me on the first plane back to Chicago. Well, that's it then. Let's go get you some clothes and shoes to wear and get on the road, insisted Jack, as the two of them continued their shopping trip. An hour later, the two of them were speeding south down Highway 93 as they reached the top of the hill south of the city. Jack was relieved as he caught the last glimpse of Las Vegas in his rearview mirror. The situation for Jack and Jen at this point seemed to be straightforward. Jack would drive Jen to her sister's house in Wickenburg, spend the night. Then first thing in the morning, Jack would continue the rest of the way home to Chicago, trying his best to make amends with all those who loved and cared for him, both at home and at work. He knew it would be a difficult challenge, but he felt ready for it. He also knew that changes would have to be made, as he was determined to not continue living his life as he had for so many years. His biggest fear would be that Julie and the kids might not forgive him for leaving unexpectedly as he did. He hoped that they would. Then Jack smiled for the first time in many days, thinking that everything might just work out. However, no one could ever have imagined or even understood the desperation of a man such as Michael. You could argue that it was love, or one might argue that it was just his love of power and control that drove him. But Michael was not the kind of man to be outdone by anyone. He was determined to have Jen, and his personal insecurities made him even more determined than ever to find her. And in his resourcefulness, he had planned a way. The phone that Jen still had in her bag was a birthday present from Michael, given several months ago. Unbeknownst to Jen, not only had the phone been a gift from Michael, in order that the two of them be able to keep in touch, but it had also been a way for Michael to secretly keep track of her whereabouts. And as Jack and Jen began their journey down the highway, Michael and his friends weren't far behind. As many Phoenicians will attest, the highway between Phoenix and Las Vegas is a long, boring stretch of mostly nothing mentionable, save for a few lovely views of open desert regions and mountainous highways, along with a few small hamlets interspersed along the way. It was on this stretch of open highway, somewhere between the cities of Boulder and Kingman, that Jack first noticed the two dark SUVs that had been staying close behind them for the last 30 miles. "Jen," he yelled, "I think we're being followed." "How do you know?" asked Jen, yelling in his ear from behind. "There are two SUVs behind us. They've been staying close behind, never passing me when they had a chance." "I think you're imagining things, Jack. How could Michael know where we are?" Jack shook his head. Maybe Jen was right, he thought. How could Michael possibly know where they were? After all, he's not a mind reader. Jack continued down the highway, keeping a close eye on the two vehicles in his mirror. I've got an idea, Jack yelled. What's that? Hang on. Jack saw an exit to the left ahead and a large sign that read, Meadview, 38 miles. Turning off the road, he watched behind to see if the two SUVs followed them east onto Pierce Ferry Road. Sure enough, they did. Jack continued east for several miles, occasionally taking turns down some of the dirt side roads, as each time they did, the SUVs turned and followed with them. How is it that Michael was able to follow me? Jen yelled. Jack suddenly recalled something about certain kinds of cell phones. Your phone? What kind is it, and where did you get it? It's an iPhone, and it was a Valentine's gift from... Jen's voice stopped suddenly. You're not telling me he can track me with my phone, are you? Why that son of a... All this time he's been following me. That's so like him. I should have known. Maybe, maybe not. It's the only thing I can think of, Jen. Hang on tight, yelled Jack, turning the bike around once more. He gave his bike full throttle, heading east once again as he sped down Pierce Ferry Road. Let's see if we can lose these guys. For several miles, Jack weaved his way from one road to another as he worked his way closer and closer to the mountainous area to the northeast. Several times, he had passed by the lead SUV and thought he could see Michael's maniacal expression on his face as they sped by. Hang on, Jen. The road is going to start getting rough ahead. Jack yelled as he turned onto the dirt road ahead of them, more of a wide horse trail than roadway. He heard the engine roar beneath them in protest to the excursion as he climbed farther and farther up into the mountain wilderness ahead. Jack really didn't know where he was going, just that he wanted to get away. Suddenly, in his side mirror, Jack noticed one of the SUVs on the road behind them. He saw it as it missed a narrow turn and careened down into a dry creek bed below as they continued deeper and deeper into the desert and closer to the mountain ahead. Trying not to think about it too much, Jack continued racing on up the side of the mountain, checking his gas gauge, which was starting to get low as he looked down momentarily, narrowly missing a sharp turn in the trail. That was a close one, Jack, he mumbled to himself. Higher and higher they climbed. Behind them, they could see the dusty road they had entered on in the distance behind and slightly below them. As Jack reached the ridge of the next hill, he had to turn quickly to avoid a sudden twist in the trail. Unfortunately for the black SUV behind him, he couldn't react as quickly as Jack, and over the ridge went Michael's SUV, careening down the hillside straight into the canyon on the opposite side. The two of them glanced to the side quickly. Out of the corner of his eye, Jack could see Michael's SUV collide headfirst into a rock wall on the opposite side of the canyon. Realizing he was lost, Jack was now trying to find a way out of the mess he had got them into. Jack continued speeding along the trail for nearly a quarter of a mile as the trail suddenly turned once again and began to steepen and narrow. Much too steep and much too narrow for Jack with his limited riding skills to negotiate, as the two of them, bike and all, tumbled and slid sideways into the bottom of the canyon.